Thank you, Cole. We are on record now. Okay. Hello, my name is Jane Civiletti, and I'd like to welcome you all to the first of what we hope will be several interesting, informative sessions for the Oak Lodge community. Our speaker, Dan Vizzini, was suggested as our presenter today by another Oak Lodge Governance Project member, Chips Janger. Chips and Dan have been colleagues working in a PSU program for local government managers in Japan. Mr. Vizzini is a senior fellow with PSU's Center for Public Service, as well as a policy analyst with OHSU's Center for Evidence-Based Policy. For 35 years, Dan has lived right across the Willamette from us in Lake Oswego, and he's here to lead a discussion on the ways governments work together and tend to the needs and demands of the public. Take it away, Mr. Vizzini.
Thank you, Jane, and welcome everyone to this session. I have a few comments I would like to make before we get started. And first off, I might turn off my video if only to preserve bandwidth at my house. The glasses that I'm wearing have a blue filter on them, so it isn't that I've taken psychedelic drugs. It's just the effect of the glasses. So just bear that in mind. As Jane said, Chips Janger and I work on a training program with the Japanese on local government and community projects and community building and civic engagement. And so when Chips asked if I would do this, it provided an opportunity, basically an opportunity for me to do research into an area that I was not completely familiar with. Despite what the newspaper says, I am not an expert. I'm more of a student and an interested observer in local government, community building, civic engagement, and politics. And so I really actually love the idea that I had this opportunity to spend the last couple of weeks digging into this question. The title is provocative by choice. It's one way to get a large crowd, but it also, it's an issue that underlies so much of our public discourse. And so I feel like it's something that we need to acknowledge. And so the presentation that I'm going to make is going to begin with that and start at a very high level and then move into into North Clackamas County and into the corridor, the McLaughlin corridor specifically. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that this program is focusing on a region that is the homeland of dozens of Native American tribes and bands, all of whom were forcibly and without in many cases without treaty or compensation, moved off to reservations in Warm Springs and Grand Ronde. And I believe that I personally at least need to acknowledge that we begin there and acknowledge that history. Before we go any further, I just also want to speak to the specific purpose of this presentation. My goal today is to provide a context about the issue of self-government and the way citizens build local government structures to solve their problems or meet their needs or advance their aspirations. My hope is that by starting at this very broad level, future forums can focus in on details and build off of this foundation. And so I'm not going to get into the specific legal or financial or economics specifics of decision-making around building local government structures. I'll leave that to future programs. But what I would like to do is present a survey of the landscape in the metropolitan area and in North Clackamas. And so with that in mind, and as has been my practice through my entire career in government, before I go any further, I would like to get a sense of the kinds of questions that you have or the kinds of things that you would like to get out of this session. And you can either put them in the chat or ask them by raising your hand.
Feel free if you'd like just to unmute yourself and ask the question if that is easier for you.
I'll go. So this is Grover down in Jennings Lodge. And I actually just really want to speak to this whole project. First of all, I'm glad it's going on. We've been engaged in this. I've lived here for 30 years. But I'm interested in how are we going to, one, get clear about why it matters to us about our own future governance. And so thank you, Cole, for that round robin at the beginning to ask people about what matters to them. But specifically then, what are our choices across the full array, which is what this project group is working on, but it's so that we will get the information, like how will it affect us cost-wise, taxes, franchise money, it's what kind of boundaries, is it all or none, and some go one way and some go the other. So it's that's why I'm attending, and one, I'm glad that this project is going on, is to be able to get that kind of specific. I don't know if that's what Dan's going to talk about, but I want to, at least you ask, what do we care about? And that's what I care about. Thank you.
And I'm noting on the chat 2 questions, one having to do with the main differences between being incorporated and unincorporated. And then this question about claiming taxes will increase versus an increase in services by doing so. Sort of the relationship between increasing services through forming local governance structures and then the way we pay for them.
I'll sort of second what's been said so far. I really liked what Grover said. It seems like it's sort of just a concept, and I'd like to maybe at some point drill down into some more of the specifics.
The way I was coming at it was that part of it has to do with local control, in the sense of that the area, I think, is going to be growing, and therefore there's going to be a lot of changes. And I'd like to see the growth of this area be done really intelligently and with some kind of inspiration for making something really beautiful and something that really enriches our lives. And I noticed that I got involved in the McLaughlin area plan, and we spent a couple of years figuring out what would make the area grow better. And one of it was having nodes. And one of the nodes was going to be McLaughlin Boulevard and Oak Grove Boulevard right in there. Seemed like a natural. But what actually came out of that was a big storage building there, right at the heart of what would be the center of town, of a new town. So I thought, well, local control is a real issue in the sense of generating the kind of energy that will make things go the way we'd really love to, fulfill a vision of some sort, right? So I figure that's where I come from.
Thank you for that. Let me see. Another question on the chat is there a specific issue or situation that got this project started? I think I'm going to leave that to the organizers. And then building on Grover's comment and Dan's intro, what is the problem that is the reason for pursuing incorporation and what needs are unmet? Sort of similar to the question about what issue or situation got the project started. I think the last comment about local control over land use, zoning, and growth management might be part of the answer to that question, but the answer to that question is really for the citizens of the area and the organizers of the project. And with that, I think what I'll do is I made a list. What I'm going to do is hopefully going through the presentation, I'll be able to answer some of this. And hopefully if I get through the presentation quickly enough, we'll have enough time for the organizers to address some of the questions that I have not answered or did not prepare to answer. So let's move on. And let's see, I think I'm going to need to share my screen. So let's do that. And please let me know if you do not see the screen.
You're good to go, Dan.
Okay, so as I said at the beginning, the title of this is The Paradox of Our Love-Hate Relationship with Self-Government, and the subtitle is A Brief Survey of Local Self-Governance in the Northwest corner of Clackamas County, Oregon. They are related, although they're it may not seem so. So I'm going to try and explain myself here. To begin with, and I'm going back to the founding to sort of set the stage. From the very beginnings of this nation, Americans have fostered a healthy skepticism about government, including our founders. And here are some quotes from individuals who had played a central role in our revolution and in the forming of the country. All of them have expressed concerns about giving power to governments and without limitation, and the harms that could come from that. I love James Madison's quote from the Federalist Papers: "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men, over men, the great difficulty lies in this: you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." And that was the entire project of at the founding of the country. How do you create just enough government to create the conditions for freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And how do you do that in such a way that the government does not overtake preserving those liberties? Despite their own fears and doubts, they promoted a powerful civic faith in governments created by the people to address community needs and secure the promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And here in the Declaration of Independence, I put in bold what I consider to be the most significant observation, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted by men, and they're deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. This is at the very, very core, that we believe that it is as citizens, it is our right, and in some cases our duty, to institute governments, use the structures of self-government to address our needs and to continue making progress as a people. And they answered this skepticism and sort of honored that civic faith by coming up with a brilliant solution. And this solution really is built on a set of self-reinforcing principles. Some of these have been tested in recent years, but for more than 200 years, they have proven to be substantially resilient. And they are a limited federal government with enumerated powers and responsibilities. Unlike previous national governments that were formed on monarchies of absolute power, the intent here was to create a national government that did not have unlimited unnamed powers, but was limited to the specific powers granted to it in the Constitution. That we are a people that abide by the rule of law and a set of checks and balances between the various branches of government. And that we have a Republican system of representative government, democracy. We do not have direct democracy. We rely on representatives that we select through popular vote to do the work of organizing and running the government. And federalism, this notion that there's a sharing of power and responsibilities between the national government and the states. And the states have independent power given to them through their own popularly approved constitutions to establish rules for creating government at the local level, at the municipal level. And all of that sets up what has been happening in this country for more than 200 years. So here we are, a nation built on skepticism about government, and paradoxically spending the last almost 250 years building out, establishing, putting in place more than 90,000 government entities. And in Oregon, that number is sitting right now at a little bit more than 1,500. That, to me, is the paradox that
no video, no audio.
I'm hearing a little feedback there. Oh,
Should be good to go, Dan.
okay. So that is the ultimate paradox, that on one hand, we're a people that inherently are skeptical about giving over power and responsibilities to governments. And yet we have found over our entire history that that we have the tools in place to do that, and to do that effectively, and to make progress by doing so. I did a little bit of research using the US Census of Governments to take a look at the mix of government types. This slide shows that there is, compared to the United States as a whole, Oregon has significantly more special district governments than incorporated municipalities, and that we have about the same percentage of the government units are counties in Oregon and school districts in Oregon as appears across the country. But the main difference in terms of local governance is the difference between incorporated cities and towns and special purpose districts of all kinds. Let's see, the next slide takes a look at those special districts by category. These categories were provided by or provided in this US Census of Governments. They're not mine. And so to some extent, they don't particularly translate to the ways that we may be familiar with in the state. But the bottom line here is that again, comparing Oregon to the United States, we have a higher percentage of districts that are in fire protection. Given last year, some of us might think we need more. We have a fairly higher percentage in a broad area of natural resources. A lot of these are soil and conservation districts and other kinds of natural resource management districts. And we have a fairly high percentage of water and sanitary districts, or districts that provide those kinds of utilities. So now moving from the federal to the regional, the region, and this image is intended to kind of show the pattern of land subdivisions, platting, and development, and then what is in its sort of shadowy way, the formation of incorporated cities. So you do have large areas, the Aloha area, the Oak Lodge area, but even out in sort of the ex-urban areas of the region, large tracts of land that are not in incorporated areas. Just to give you an example of a different kind of pattern of government formation, I went to school in Boston, and in Massachusetts, there isn't a single square inch of land that is not in a city or town. The entire state is made up of cities and towns, and that's a legacy of the Mass Bay Company, and it's the model that it used for more than 100 years before the Declaration of Independence, of creating towns that had adequate woodlots and farmland and water to support a specific targeted population. And in fact, the town boundaries tended to be no more than 6 miles away from the town center, because the town center was essentially a church, and the idea was that 6 miles was about the distance it took to get to church, or the maximum distance it would take to get to church. So the difference is that Oregon was settled 200 years later, and primarily with limited control over how settlements were developed. There was some design imposed by the trading companies, but for the most part, settlements occurred, certainly by contrast to Massachusetts, in a random and opportunistic way. And so we had settlements long before we had the governments to provide the services at the kinds of levels that, say, an urbanized or suburbanized area would need. So in the metropolitan area, we have these cities. We're looking primarily at the area within the urban growth boundary. And you can see how, again, there are areas that are not within cities, significant areas that over the next 20 years or 50 years will continue to build out and develop. And so the questions of self-governance are not going to go away. They're going to continue to show up in discussions all over the region. I'm going to show you a series of maps that show the various service districts. So here are fire districts, and again, fire districts are pretty much ubiquitous throughout the region. There are areas like this is obviously the city of Portland. And then we have Hillsborough and I think this is like Forest Grove that are outside of these special purpose fire districts. Yeah, Gladstone down here also. And then here are water districts. And this is interesting here that this is the city of Portland and city of Gresham, and Rockwood is a people's utility district, and it did not, because of the authorities given to it in state law, was not required to disband when Portland and Gresham annexed areas around it. So Rockwood actually continues to operate independently of the city of Portland and Gresham, even though it's significant portions of the district are within those two cities. It's not unusual in Washington County and in Clackamas County for municipalities, incorporated municipalities, to be served by special purpose districts. That's very common, certainly for water districts and here sanitary districts. And again, the pattern here is that in Multnomah County, the significantly sewered areas of Multnomah County are all served by municipality, either directly or through intergovernmental agreements. And then here are park and rec districts. And again, park and rec districts can coexist with municipalities. They do in the northwest corner of Clackamas County, and they do in Washington County as well. So I did a bit of a tally by county. So places are locations within a county that are either incorporated or where there's a concentration of settlements and businesses to have acquired a place name, either by the Census Bureau or popularly. And so I got these statistics primarily from Wikipedia. And what I'm showing here is the mix of places in each of the counties and then the mix of the population in each of the counties. And you can see that Clackamas and Washington are like this Jeffersonian landscape of places where people have settled across the landscape. And only a small percentage of those places are incorporated. Even in Multnomah County, a small percentage of the total number of places in the county are incorporated. By contrast, the population is a different matter. So in Multnomah County, a significant portion, nearly 100% of the population is it resides in incorporated areas. Whereas in Clackamas County, it's slightly, I think it's about 48% or 49% of Clackamas County residents reside in unincorporated areas. And in Washington County, I think it's in the 30%, 30 to 35% range of individuals who are who reside in unincorporated areas. Took a look at government structures by county, and again, these government structures are run a little bit different in their categories than the U.S. government census. And you can see these are numbers of government entities. So we have in deep blue unincorporated cities, and then you can see the predominance of fire districts, sanitary districts, water districts, sanitary districts, soil and conservation. And then you have some ones that are like street lighting and road districts. You can see in Washington County, for instance, there are a lot more activity around dealing with roads in unincorporated areas in particular. and street lighting. And then in Washington, or in Clackamas County, uniquely has a district that provides extension, raises funds for OHSU, or I'm sorry, OSU extension and 4-H. Let's see, moving on. Now we're gonna turn our attention to the McLaughlin corridor, and I would say Oak Lodge, but I kind of felt like there's enough of a debate about Oak Lodge, or there's enough ownership of Oak Lodge by enough people that it might be better to try and avoid the question. But so I referred to it as the McLaughlin corridor, but everyone knows what I'm talking about here. So here's the area with Milwaukee on the north and Gladstone on the south, and the Willamette and Happy Valley out here, and then this large area of unincorporated residents and businesses. So taking a look at the natural landscape, you have what I've highlighted here are the 100-year flood plain and wetlands, and then areas of relatively steep or steep slope, and then sort of the plains, for lack of a better word. This is how the settlement pattern has grown as Clackamas County went from rural and forested to suburban, and then to ostensibly, or sort of bordering on urban in terms of the levels of density. The brown areas are areas of undeveloped land for the most part, and then the grayish areas are they're essentially platted lots. And then here are the incorporated cities. As I said, you have Milwaukee and Gladstone, Johnson City, and Happy Valley. They're the 4 incorporated cities within the area that we're talking about. On the other side of the river, you have West Lynn and Lake Oswego. And then, of course, to the south, you have Oregon City. I took a look at the history and the population of the cities, and these are color-coded. So Oregon City and Canby were formed in the 1800s. Then you had this a little bit of a break of a couple decades, and then you had a rash of cities: Barlow, Estacada, Milwaukee, Lake Oswego, Gladstone, Sandy, Malawa, and and West Lynn, all in a decade between, or 11 years between 1903 and 1913. And then you had another break, and then the formation of Happy Valley, West Lynn, Wilsonville, Johnson City, and River Grove over on the other side of the Willamette in the mid 60s to early 70s. And then you had Damascus in 2004, and I had Damascus on this because the Supreme Court hadn't ruled yet, but I think recently the Supreme Court has ruled that Damascus is decommissioned as a city. So Damascus technically is no longer an incorporated city, but it was originally formed in 2004. So the pattern, it's interesting, of this pattern of gaps between waves of incorporation and then development, and then waves of incorporation. So beyond the cities, here, the fire districts are, in particular, Clackamas Fire District 1, the predominant service provider for fire services, fire suppression, protection services, with the exception of Gladstone. For water districts, you have the Oak Lodge Water Services District, and Clackamas Water District, or Clackamas River Water District 1, and Sunrise. carrying a significant responsibility for providing water. Milwaukee and Gladstone are not included in those service areas, at least according to Metro's classification. And then you have sanitary districts, and again, Oak Lodge with significant responsibilities reaching in, as I believe, into Gladstone. Some of the basins reach into Gladstone, and I think Milwaukee as well are close to it. And then you have Clackamas County Service 1. Johnson City does not participate in Clackamas County Service District 1. I'm not exactly sure what is going on in Johnson City. Didn't have the chance to really delve deeply into that. And then Parks and Rec. And so the North Clackamas Parks and Rec District provides services throughout this part of the world. Again, with the exception of Johnson City, Happy Valley, and Gladstone. And there is a story to tell about the legal battle that has been going on in Happy Valley, originally in the service district, and then withdrawn from the service district, and the negotiations back and forth over that change in local self-governance. This slide attempts to put on a timeline some major events in the region or in this area. So up here at the top are milestones of population by decade, by census. And this green colored curve represents the growth in population. This is Clackamas County. I did not feel confident getting an isolated population estimate for this time frame for the Oak Lodge area. So I'm showing you the background of population growth in the county as a whole. So we're going back to 1843 with the original creation of the Clackamas District by the Oregon Provisional Legislature. This is even before statehood and before, I think it's even before the treaty with the UK on where the US line would be drawn, 49th parallel. You had the first plat of land filed in Oak Grove in 1892, and the first plat in Jennings Lodge filed in 1903. In that same year, Milwaukee incorporated, and a few years later, Gladstone incorporated. And then in 1922, Oak Lodge Water District was created. There was an Oak Lodge Fire Department. So the term Oak Lodge actually goes back in time, and I need to thank the Oak Lodge what are they called? The historical detectives. What a remarkable website that is for providing at least a clue to some of this history. In the 50s, you had the two sanitary districts formed in Oak Lodge. They later merged in 1970. And then the water district and the merged sanitary districts came together into the service district, the water service district, in 2017. And in between that period of time, North Clackamas Park and Rec was created in 1990. The fire district I did not include on here, but there's a significant amount of activity in the formation of rural fire protection districts, and then their consolidation, adding up to the creation of the Fire District 1, or the consolidation of fire districts into Fire District 1. I did not include that on here, but that went on during this entire period as well. So you can see, and then also during this period in 65, you have Happy Valley, and in 1970, Johnson Creek incorporating. So you can see that over this course of history, it's been dynamic. It's also been in waves, the kinds of activities that citizens engage in to build and reshape and reorganize local government to meet their needs. This table attempts to highlight the different kinds of services that typically cities provide, and then how those cities in the region, in this particular area, are meeting those needs. And you can see that no city stands alone. No city provides 100% of all of the services, urban services, the full package of urban services that you might expect to be provided by an incorporated municipality. All of them rely on some form of relationship, either intergovernmental relationship or coexistence for some of these services. And in the case of Johnson City, it's not at all clear that they provide any of these services themselves. That, for instance, in the case of police, I believe that they're covered under the extended protection of the sheriff's department. They do not have their own police force, and they're a tiny little city anyway. So there are good reasons why, for economies of scale, that doesn't take place. But a lot of this variation by city is really an artifact of the history of its development, the timing of its development, the maturity and effectiveness of the service districts that either pre-existed them or came online after their formation, and changes in state law that allowed for a blending of incorporated municipal services and service districts. Here's a comparison in Washington County, and the same is true in Washington County. There are no cities in the area of within the metropolitan service district boundaries that provide 100% of services on their own. They all of them rely, and in particular, all of them rely on wastewater treatment services through Clean Water Services, and some of them rely on those services directly for not just through intergovernmental arrangements, but through this overlapping coexisting relationship.
Hey, Dan, if I could really quickly, I just want to be mindful that we are at about 12:45, and we were hoping to we put that it was a 1 hour, and I know we want to have probably 8 to 10 minutes for questions. So I just want to give you a quick time check.
Yeah, so I'm going to quickly go through at least my observations from the research. First of all, that the mix of voter-approved local government structures is varied throughout the region, and that's completely understandable because they're voter-approved, and each community in the region, each part of the region tries to figure this out on their own. Service to unincorporated areas followed a few clear patterns. There were either extensions of services by counties, the formation of service districts, annexation by existing cities, or formation of new cities. Formation of local governments are driven by diverse forces: economic interests, inadequate infrastructure or urban services, inadequate financial resources to fund desired services. So you create a service district to raise the money needed, protection and promotion of community character, and self-determination. Cities and special districts find ways to coexist and prosper together. And changes in state law, particularly the changes that were made in 2010, allow for this kind of coexistence to work. And then the consolidation of special districts is an ongoing dynamic. In Clackamas County and in Washington County in particular, there has been just a long history of formation of small districts and then their consolidation over time. And at least those are the kinds of observations that came to me as I was doing this research. I think I'll stop there. I do have a few more slides, but I'll hold them in abeyance and turn to any questions that folks might have.
Dan, I sent you one I got in the chat during the meeting, so I can read it out loud if that would be helpful. Or Leah, if you want to unmute and just go ahead, we'd appreciate hearing it from you too.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's sort of a strand. You were showing the urban and it makes sense to me that the rural and exurban areas of Clackamas County are unincorporated. Totally makes sense. But it seems inevitable that the urban areas ultimately will incorporate. Is it inevitable? If it is, isn't it in our best interests to determine how it's incorporated? But if it's not inevitable, can you share some examples of areas across the country that are super urban but unincorporated, and what do those areas look like?
Yeah. So it's not a foregone conclusion that places will incorporate. It is entirely up to the people. It's entirely up to citizens. In the Lake Grove, in the Oak Lodge area, there have been several attempts, several intense discussions over the 100 years about incorporation, and but there has never been a significant enough critical mass of citizens to support a petition to create one that one hasn't been created. It is not a foregone conclusion. And the other thing is, incorporation is not going to occur at the edict of the state. In fact, the state constitution prohibits the legislature from dictating the formation of a municipal corporation. So you're not going to have the solution that way. So Clackamas County can continue to densify, to urbanize, and do so. They're very robust, very healthy service districts that exist in Clackamas County. It could be that Clackamas County continues a pattern of unincorporated areas served by service districts and with community planning organizations representing the interests of that community to the county government. That is a possible future. So it's very, very clear that incorporation can only occur at the will of the people.
And just to follow up on Leah's question, Leah, I recall you asking, were there other examples you had across the country of dense, urban areas that weren't incorporated? Do you have any examples of that, Dan? Or
I don't have the specific numbers, but I believe, having driven through and around and spent time in Aloha is a very significant. It's suburban and urbanizing in a very quick way in Washington County. The area north of 206 and between Route 26 and Forest Heights is another area it brought within the urban growth boundary that's increasing in density and development. The area south of Happy Valley, the Damascus area, even though they were incorporated and are not incorporated, is an area that's going to continue to urbanize. And so all of these areas, at least in the metropolitan area, represent areas where incorporation or annexation could occur. But again, that'll only happen if the people who live there organize to produce that effect. And under the rules and state law, the neighboring cities, I believe, have an opportunity to weigh in as well.
Thanks, Dan. We probably have enough time for one or two more questions from Dan, and then I also want to make sure that a member of the steering committee, like Eleanor, has a moment to answer Grover's question from the very beginning. So if you do have a question for Dan, please unmute yourself.
I was wondering if dense urban areas like Oak Grove, we have a population of somewhere around 25,000 people. Is that unusual to have a fairly large population remain unincorporated, or are we sort of within the normal bell curve? Do you know?
Well, in the 1980s, mid-Multnomah County, the area between then Portland, which extended to about 92nd Avenue, and Gresham, was a very large unincorporated area. I think over 50,000 properties, and I don't recall. I think it may have been close to 100,000 population in that area before a state order that required the sewering of the area and decommissioning of cesspools drove the area to become annexed by Portland and Gresham as a part of the solution for fixing that environmental problem. There's a long history there, and I could spend a day talking about that. And I think there are people on the call who could join me.
Ken Go, I did not see your hand up, and I apologize. I want to make sure that we give you a chance to ask your question.
I don't know if I have any questions. This has all been very fascinating and interesting to me. I'm just more gathering information than anything else.
Well, we should make sure that we answer some of those questions that came up at the beginning, if there's time.
I think there is. So Eleanor, if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick overview, that'd be really helpful.
Grover, do you want to repeat your question or?
I don't actually remember having a specific question. It was more of a comment about what we were doing. I mean, my question really is to find out what are the specifics to making a choice whether to go forward with incorporating or not, would fill in the specificity around funding requirements, what kind of money would be brought in by franchises, et cetera, versus what costs that we're not already paying, because there virtually is no service we're getting now that we're not paying for anyway. So really the dollars and cents of it is one thing, what added burden of cost. And then the other is what kind of unifying, because if we were to incorporate it, we would have to come up with our own comprehensive plan. And I don't know whether there's a common vision yet throughout the 45 to 50,000 people. I don't know where we draw the line, but it's in that range of people that live in this unincorporated island of paradise.
So to give people an overview of the project that we're involved in, many of us and many on the call have been involved in past incorporation explorations. And when we've done that, any kind of research, there's always been, the first question is, how much is it going to cost me? I mean, basically, Grover, you know, what you're asking. And that's the basic question. So this is one of the things that we've realized is to go forward in any way. Those of us who are involved in various community activities and stuff, we bump up against this edge of a lack of agency for the residents in this area. And that's, you know, as you were saying, Dan, it's like, it's up to the people in this area of what is it that we want. And I really appreciate your slide of saying like, what your observations, you know, what were those sort of 5 reasons that areas do tend to incorporate? And I was sort of like, check, 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 check.
Yeah.
So we've gotten a grant from Metro, and the purpose of that grant is specifically to fund an economic and governance options study, because wanting to address these specific questions. So I also want to recognize that people have written in for this particular talk with questions that were really out of the realm of this particular conversation, but completely within the realm of what it is that we're wanting to research. You know, how much will it cost? What happens to franchise taxes? What are those different options that happen? Leah, as you asked, is incorporation, you know, inevitable, or can it be annexed, or are there other things to be done? That's one of the parts of the questions that we're trying to find out. That research study will be done by the end of, say, August, somewhere in the end of the summer. And then when that gets released, we'll have a whole bunch of information about that. But in the meantime, between now and when that research study is released, We're wanting to build knowledge of this project, get more people understanding, do they actually live in the city of Milwaukee, or are they in the Oak Grove and Jennings Lodge CPO districts that are designated by the county? There's a huge lack of identity in this area. So that whole idea of like, how do we help spread the word, let more people know what's going on? Our hope, we'll have our website will be up probably, I don't know, a couple more weeks maybe. We're working on sort of the finalization of some of that. And actually, Mitra perhaps could give us an update on where that study is with Echo Northwest. Mitra?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Like Eleanor said, the study, we're expecting a deliverable by the end of August, and we are really excited to be in the throes of building a public outreach campaign so that we can have those kinds of conversations that you were talking about, Grover, in terms of creating creating those comprehensive visions and conversations about where we go from here. That said, I also want to temper expectations about this particular study. So the amount of money that we had that we were granted was $100,000, and there is just simply not the resources available to present all the opportunities in the entire world that we could, that we can use to create, this ideal place. And so our thinking is that this is going to give us some really concrete answers, some numbers, some baseline scenarios from which to work. And then from there, we're expecting more questions to be asked. So I just want to make sure that the community understands that we're considering this particular study to be a beginning point to conversations that we're expecting to frankly last for a few years. This is not something that all of a sudden we can say, oh, look, this is so beautifully packaged. Now we just pick scenario A, B, or C. We know that there's going to be a lot more nuance, a lot more questions, and a lot more study to have to go into. But we do know confidently that we will be able to start having those conversations with real numbers come this fall.
Mitra, I have one question that came through in the chat on that, and it is 101. Right after that, I want to make sure that we are respecting folks' Saturday afternoons. Will the study results include at least one option of incorporating with zero, starting new tax base to start, but getting the benefit of state revenue sharing dollars? So basically, will it look at, actually, Dave, do you want to go ahead and ask that question? I want to make sure that I worded that, or I read that correctly.
No, I think you got it right, and it really follows on Eleanor's comment. Since the fear of new taxes is a barrier to so many of our neighbors, is that at least one option that will be on the table of incorporating, like some other cities have done, very few, but some, incorporating with zero new tax base, but at least becoming a city so we can take advantage of all those city revenue sharing dollars from the state.
What I would say is that what we're doing is we're creating three potential scenarios. One is annexation into Milwaukee, one is maintaining status quo, and then one is creating a new city with essentially Milwaukee level services. And so a lot of those questions and those areas in which you're referencing will be pointed out, where if we did this thing, then nothing would happen, or if we did this thing, then the revenue will increase this much. So those are definitely questions that are going to be brought up in the scenario. But I think that, to your point, we would take this study and then extrapolate into something else to be able to get the precise scenario that you're describing.
Eleanor, you're on mute.
Thanks. One of the things that Echo Northwest, the economic consultant, is working with us is how much can we get out of that $100,000 for this particular study. As Mitra was saying, it can't possibly give us everything. So they're doing what they can to do it so that we can pull things apart and have reasonable numbers to be able to have a variety of scenarios. Because Dave, what you're saying is that's exactly one of those things. Like, do we want like absolutely nothing with the same thing? Like, what would we get if we just have it be the same? And then what are the different service levels that we want to have? So one of the things we're really looking at is return on investment. What do you pay and what do you get for it? What are we paying now and what are we getting for it? What are we not paying and what are we not getting? So it's how to be able to, within that $100,000, the current constraint of that, to be able to tease out as many answers as possible. So if anybody has any ideas about additional funding available, we're welcome to hear it. Let me tell you. And Grover
Grover, I
has,
see your hand, and then let's hopefully make this the last question.
All right, I just want to clarify something I just heard Mitra say that I was not aware of, and that is to have Milwaukee level services, which is very different than the question that was asked about having zero increase. Milwaukee is one of the most expensive cities in Clackamas County to live in, and they have one of the highest tax rates. So I don't know, do you really mean Milwaukee level as opposed to the question, which was at zero increase in taxes?
We had to create 3 scenarios in which to pull from. And so what we're hoping, and like what Eleanor just said, is that we'll be able to take those numbers and finagle them to create other scenarios later. But in terms of the base level study, that is the starting place. Now, we could always walk back from there,
right.
but
And,
we need some place to start.
and what we needed to do is make sure that we were comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So to make sure that those numbers are really accurate, there had to be some boundaries put on stuff. So I hear you, Grover. It's like, well, we want to ask these questions. It's like, yes, but if we start here, we can move it down there. So again, it's how do we get as many options? How do we get as much bang for that buck? So those are the things. There's lots of conversation around that. It was a very thoughtful thing. Good. Okay, it's 1:05. So
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate the robust conversation that happened here. As we mentioned at the beginning, this is the first, definitely not the last, definitely not the only. We really appreciate how many people showed up this afternoon, and we will be in touch with more community opportunities moving forward. So thank you, Dan. Let's give a
Dan,
quick round of applause or a reaction clap.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and again, our website will be launching soon, and we'll be letting people know in every way that we can. And anyone you know who wants to be added to the list to be notified, please, 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 we'll be happy to do that. And we're gathering questions as we go. And when those are pertinent, we will add them in for the speakers to come. So thank you all so much for being here. Lovely.